Hey, welcome back to Album April. It's April 17th, and today I listened to Horses by Patti Smith. This is on the docket for albums to review this month for the same reason that Tapestry by Carole King was. It just showed up on lists of best albums of all time. I didn't even know who Patti Smith was before today. I had never heard of her before. I looked at her songs, none of them looked familiar to me. Basically, this album is my first impression of her, and it was actually everyone's first impression of her. This was her first album. At the time of its release, it was acclaimed by music critics and is said to have had a very strong impact on punk rock, since punk rock was in its formative years at the time, 1975. And a few years later, probably the prototypical first huge punk rock band, The Clash, would make its debut. My first impression of Horses by Patti Smith is, wow, this is going to be rough. I will not mince words with you. I hated this album, like to the same level that I hated Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan from last year. Is Horses worse than Blood on the Tracks? Being able to give a confident answer to that would probably require doing a more direct comparison between the two, and since that would likely require listening to either of these albums again, I'm not going to do that. But to describe Horses by Patti Smith, just imagine this edgy teenage girl doing slam poetry at a bar backed by a admittedly decent rock and roll backing band. It took me about 5 minutes to realize I wasn't going to like that album, and by that point I wasn't even done with the first song yet. Oh, and by the way, the edgy teenage girl was 30 at the time. I really did not like Patti Smith's delivery throughout this album. It wasn't just grandiose, it was like snarky, it was annoying. Maybe I just didn't have the right mindset going into it, but I did not enjoy myself. It occurred to me while listening to this album that her inflections and tones, especially when she gets really deep into these, what feel like ramblings, is that she almost starts to sound like a pastor delivering a sermon, with just like the way that she words it and the way that she talks. And considering some of the anti-religious sentiments in this album, that might have been intentional satire. But it all felt like it was trying so hard. It gave me kind of Jeb Bush please clap vibes for a lot of it. Out of the 8 songs on this album, I thought that 7 were bad or worse than bad, and one of them was okay. That one okay song was Free Money. I didn't think that Free Money was a great song. It was very repetitive. But it did really work on keeping the energy up, and it had a nice crescendo throughout the whole thing. Free Money had all of the really good spots that I found in Horses, like those moments of like really good intensity with the backing instruments. If all the songs on Horses were like Free Money, or even more of the songs on Horses were like Free Money, I would definitely cut it a lot more slack, but it was the exception, not the rule. And it should go without saying that there were several songs on Horses that I didn't like, but one song that I particularly didn't like was Birdland. Birdland is a 9-minute song, and it is an endurance test. Throughout the entire album, Patti Smith did a lot of sing-talking or just straight-up talking, and that was very prevalent in Birdland, and it just kept going, and going, and going. In a previous video, I described Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts from Blood on the Tracks as, I think, being among the worst songs I've ever heard, and I felt the same way about Birdland. Now, is Birdland worse than that song? Answering that question would probably mean doing a more direct comparison of the two songs, and since that would require listening to either of them again, I'm not going to do that. But I will say that just like Bob Dylan with Lily Rosemary and the Jack of Hearts, with Birdland, Patti Smith managed to make 9 minutes feel like 9 hours. I do not think that Horses by Patti Smith holds up. In fact, I think it embodies some of the worst stereotypes of punk rock. It feels overblown, pretentious, and self-important. I don't know anything about Patti Smith's music outside of this album, but if it is representative of the rest of her work, I can tell you right now I'm not much of a fan of Patti Smith. This album probably means a lot to a lot of people, and I think that's great. People can like what they want, but this was not a fun experience for me. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get something better. I'll see you then.